It is imperative, regardless whether you are a Remainer or a Leaver, that the transition period is extended. It will be an unmitigated disaster if we were to leave, combining that with the fallout of trying to recover from the coronavirus economic shock as well. It would be completely irresponsible. And to prove this, and to go over this today, so that's what we're talking about, comes from the Financial Times. Coronavirus and hard Brexit, the last combination the UK needs. It's hard to find a single trade type who thinks that failing to agree an extension is anything but a political disaster. Hi from Brussels. If there's one thing you should read today, once you've read Trade Secrets, it's this excellent ebook from the good people at Vox EU. From Vox EU. It's about how protectionism really isn't the right trade response to coronavirus. Today's main bar is on how the UK is choosing to follow the corona with a shot of hard Brexit chaser. Literally the last combination of libations we need. Tall Tales of Trade is about the latest reading of the last rights over an EU that is weak and uncoordinated as it isn't dead yet, while Charted Waters shows the decline in US exports led by consumer goods. Meanwhile, the big issues here in Belgium, as much over Europe, are 1. How and when the country exits lockdown, and 2. Where did all our nice weather go? Apparently, it's going to start improving next week again. Don't forget to click here if you'd like to receive Trade Secrets every Monday and every Thursday. I want to hear from you. But that's just a brief plug for them. You'd have thought that the global trading system in general and Europe in particular had enough going on right now without a renewal of the Brexit embargo and to complete and distract. Not now Brexit is our initial reaction. But on they go. The first of 3 negotiating rounds on the final trade agreements concluded last week, with predictably little progress being made. The big deadline is at the end of June. But at that point, the UK either asks to extend the transition period during which it remains under the EU's trade regimes, or commits to leaving at the end of the year. It is hard to find a single trade type without a direct career interest who thinks that failing to extend is anything but a political disaster. It is highly unlikely that the UK and the EU will have anything but a minimal preferential trade agreement in place by the end of the year. The result? Big border frictions, possibly tariffs, certainly rules of origin problems, declaration of professional qualifications, and the Uncle Tom, Kobe and all. But Boris Johnson's government has not only repeatedly said it won't ask for an extension, it's actually deliberately blocked and bolted the hole from that position. Initially, it seemed as if it might be executing one of its traditional blame-shifting exercises, trying to force the EU to be the one to ask, but then made a pre-commitment gambit. An unequivocal statement that it would not agree to an extension even if the EU asked, raising the cost itself of a retreat. At the same time, it also turned up the rhetoric about its participation in other partial trade agreements. A performance of churning, it evidently thinks that we will scare the EU into giving it a generous deal for fear of losing UK market share. The new British ambassador to the US sounded off last week to Politico about wanting to start bilateral trade talks, on hold since March because of the pandemic, suggesting a relaunch is fast approaching. Liz Truss, the UK Trade Secretary, prominently mentioned potential UK membership to the CPTPP in a tweet. Hold on. Brexiteers have continually complained about joining such blocs. Why are they wanting to join this one? That's definitely a question for another time, but anyway, we'll continue. In a tweet she sent out about a joint op-ed with ministers from Australia, New Zealand and Singapore this week, the most terrifying explanation is that Johnson's government genuinely believes its own rhetoric. The UK's deal to leave the EU in 2019, accepting a border down the Irish Sea and hiding it with a pumpkin of customs arrangements, was correctly regarded by most trade types as a capitulation disguised as victory. A Dunkirk analogy rises here in our throats, but you're doubtless sick of World War II metaphors as we are, so we'll have to swallow it. Perhaps the UK government really thinks it faced down the EU and got a major concession, and that it can do so again. Also, in the delusion column is an idea that you hear kicking around Brexiteer circles, that a Brexit hit to trade will be barely noticed on top of the coronavirus shock. Thus, the UK can beget a year zero of reforming supply chains. They are both bonkers. Obviously, in the latter case, it's worth remembering that coronavirus affects people, not things. Largely mechanized processes, or those with socially distanced workers, such as producing food, have thus far been remarkably unaffected by the disease. By contrast, port and border friction damages all goods trade, and problems with professional qualifications will damage even services delivered by a Zoom call. Being hungry as well as furloughed won't be an improvement. There's a far darker view, that the government is betting the public won't be able to tell the virus shock from the Brexit shock. It will be savagely cynical strategy, but one definitely hopefully beneath Johnson's government. Yeah, probably not, which is all the more terrifying. Mistaken, cynical, maybe both. It's hard to tell. In any case, our prediction at the beginning of the year that the UK would ask for an extension under whatever pretext it could find is still our default, just about. But the odds against have shortened considerably. The US export downturn is accelerating. Blame consumers, blame the lower oil prices. The latter is included in it, but not broken out from the industrial supply lines. Consumer goods were put at just 12% of US exports last year. We noticed that last week the overly dramatic make or break expectations ahead of the European Leaders Summit, claiming that if the EU and specifically the Eurozone didn't agree a big centralisation of budgetary and fiscal power, that the Union was doomed. Well, they didn't, and it's been a week, and the EU is still here. An exceedingly flippant takedown of a straw man, fair enough, but as we have discovered during the Greek financial crisis, where there were similarly overheated predictions of Grexit from the euro or even the EU, the Union can underperform for a long time without breaking up. Via our comrades at the Financial Times Brussels briefing, we bring you noted Dutch historian of the EU, Luc van Mahalde. In German, the Google translation works off okay. He articulates it, shall we say, much better than we could. Why, even given this, is dismal, eerie failure to come to the rescue of the pandemic-stricken Italy, the EU is not on the point of collapse. And this is just some bullet points, by the way. Europe's largest economies have begun to chart a way out of the coronavirus lockdown methods and have closed swaths of activity and drastically reduced social contact. Where did it all go wrong? A question some of the world's biggest financial bankers will be asking themselves after the collapse. Oh, hang on, sorry. No, that's I've just read that wrong. Oh, that's it. Yeah. So once again, Brexiteers are saying the EU is going to collapse. It hasn't. Most likely won't. Again, it's weathered such crises and it's still there because it is a good and it is a strong institution. Even, I must continue to stress this, there is a difference between that's European Eurosceptics, and British Eurosceptics, because at some point they were together and then they diverged. And it has to do with the success of the single market and how good that has been and how good it has been for all the countries involved in it in Europe. The Brexiteers of the UK and British Euroscepticism went that way, and European Euroscepticism went that way. Predominantly, they're more interested in getting rid of laws and stopping a closer political union rather than an economic union. Where the Brexiteers just don't want either, and they especially don't want an economic closeness because, as we've discovered, one of the big things that why businesses are so uncertain, and uncertainty you've been hearing for the past couple of years, why the market won't respond, especially in the UK and UK markets, why it's uncertain, is because numerous times politicians, especially the Brexit politicians, have said that we will diverge. What those diversions are going to be, we don't know. And that's why the market is completely uncertain. Because if you diverge, all of a sudden, that might cause problems if you maybe want to trade into Europe. And that makes a problem because all of a sudden you might have cheaper goods coming into Britain, which damages your local market. Which means you have two production lines. One producing the exact same good to go to the EU that meets with the regulations, and the other production line, is having to produce even cheaper goods that do not meet the regulatory standards to be able to be sent to Europe to try and compete in a local market because of cheaper goods coming into the country. That is a real economic situation, and that is why businesses and manufacturers are so uncertain about what the hell is going to go on. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is Brexit. As usual, we have no idea what the hell is going to happen.